In defendant Trump news today, another huge setback for Donald Trump in cases where he is already a defendant in cases in which Donald Trump could lose hundreds of millions of dollars. If Donald Trump does lose these cases, he will no doubt spend the rest of his life trying to appeal the judgments in these cases, which means he would remain defendant Trump for the rest of his life. Donald Trump is now facing the most threatening lawsuits he has ever faced in his life. A group of lawsuits filed by Capitol Police officers and members of Congress against Donald Trump for inciting the attack on the Capitol, which threatened the lives and injured many of those police officers and threatened the lives of members of Congress. Donald Trump has claimed that he cannot be sued in these cases and has complete immunity because on January 6th, everything he did, everything he said was said and done within his duties as president of the United States, including delivering a speech to a Trump mob who he knew was armed and who he told to go to the Capitol and, quote, fight like hell. The Justice Department disagrees with Donald Trump's defense. If the Justice Department agreed that Donald Trump was acting within his duties as president, the Justice Department would use all of their legal might to defend Donald Trump in these cases. But the Justice Department filed a brief with the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, D.C. today, supporting a Washington, D.C. federal judge's finding that Donald Trump does not have immunity from these lawsuits. In their 23-page brief supporting the denial of immunity to Donald Trump, the Justice Department said, here the district court concluded that plaintiffs' complaints plausibly allege that President Trump's speech at the rally on January 6, 2021 precipitated the ensuing attack on the Capitol, and in particular that the complaints plausibly allege that the former president's speech encouraged imminent private violent action and was likely to produce such action. The United States expresses no view on that conclusion or on the truth of the allegations in the plaintiff's complaints, but in the United States' view, such incitement of imminent private violence would not be within the outer perimeter of the office of the President of the United States. The Justice Department also agreed that the presidential speech is generally afforded broad protection due to the wide-ranging nature of the president's duties, and those protections do have limits. The Justice Department said, speaking to the public on matters of public concern is a traditional function of the presidency, and the outer perimeter of the president's office includes a vast realm of such speech, but that traditional function is one of public communication. It does not include incitement of imminent private violence of the sort the district court found the plaintiff complaints have plausibly alleged here. The Justice Department found that Donald Trump's speech on January 6th was in effect a campaign speech and therefore not subject to the protections that extend to a president fulfilling the duties of his office. The United States agrees with the district court that the office of the president has no preference for who occupies it, and that Article 2 is agnostic as to whether a sitting president is elected to a new term. A president's private, partisan electioneering activities lacking any significant nexus to his responsibilities as president may therefore fall beyond the outer limits of his office. The attorneys filing this brief work in the civil division of the Justice Department. They know that the criminal division of the Justice Department under Special Prosecutor Jack Smith is investigating the same actions by Donald Trump on January 6th for possible crimes committed by Donald Trump leading up to and on that day. And so today's brief by the civil division of the Justice Department carries a veiled acknowledgement of and a clear line of separation from that criminal investigation, which the brief does not specifically mention. Here's what the brief says about that. The absolute immunity at issue in this appeal concerns only a president's liability in a private suit for damages. In addressing that question, the United States does not express any view regarding the potential criminal liability of any person for the events of January 6, 2021, or acts connected with those events. In other words, don't take today's brief to in any way indicate whether the criminal division of the Justice Department is going to find that Donald Trump committed crimes on January 6th.